size of the container with a spatula. Once finished, this is what you should have in front of you. If you are looking for a thinner bechamel sauce, don't worry. Just add a touch of water or any other liquid to match the consistency to your likings. Now seriously, wasn't this one of the easiest recipes you have ever seen? This sauce definitely has nothing to envy compared to regular bechamel sauce. In fact, it tastes even better. If you haven't guessed already, this video is about making a divine plant-based pesto. This recipe is in fact adapted from Dr. Michael Greger's book How Not to Die, which is not a recipe book, but it happens to be one of the best books on nutrition I've ever read. And since it included this delicious and healthy recipe, I thought it would be a nice idea to share it with you. And now, let's get to the recipe, which is obviously incredibly easy to make. To begin and finish with, place all the ingredients into a food processor and blitz until you obtain a paste of the consistency you desire. Different beans or nuts yield pesto of different consistencies, so if you see that the blades aren't catching the ingredients properly, you can always add some extra water and blend again. We are using a NutriBullet here, as we wanted to show that you don't always need a fancy blender to make great food, and this recipe is the perfect example. Obviously, I didn't want to take any credit for a recipe that I didn't create myself, which is why I not only recommend you to give this one a try to please your taste buds, but also to get a copy of the book How Not to Die, as I'm sure you'll find it revelatory. This recipe has been slightly modified from the original, as I personally like it better this way. Also, the original recipe is not in grams, so I wanted to give my grams using followers the chance to make this delicacy without having to play with cups and spoons. The only other thing I want to add, and then I promise I'll let you go, is hats off to you, Dr. Greger, both for the book and for the healthy recipe. This preparation has absolutely nothing to do with regular Italian pesto, for which we already have a recipe. However, it is not only incredibly easy to make and super healthy, but also unbelievably delicious. I think it's safe to say that I couldn't have done a better job myself. And here is the final pesto. For all of those who think that it is not possible to create amazing food without using unhealthy ingredients, this is probably the best recipe to prove yourselves wrong, as I know you will love it. Today's recipe is for a sauce that we keep finding ourselves being asked for, vegan gravy. We've worked pretty hard on this sauce, as we really wanted it to be special, and after a few attempts, we feel like we might have managed to create the best vegan gravy ever. Did we mention it's also completely fat-free? To begin with, chop the vegetables into fairly small pieces. Any size will do, just don't chuck them in whole. Place a pan over medium heat, tip in the diced vegetables and stir. Then add the bay leaf, which should be torn into pieces. Here you want to cook the vegetables until you see they start coloring slightly. At that point, add in the sugar and stir to combine. Now add in the tomato paste and the miso. What next? You guessed it, stir to combine. Time to pour in the stock, the vinegar and the soy sauce. You can also add the flour at this stage if you are using a cold stock. However, if you are using a hot stock, mix the flour with some cold water before adding it to the pan, otherwise it will clump together and you won't obtain a smooth final sauce. At this point you can also add the rest of the herbs and stir them in. Next, we want to simply bring the liquid to a boil and reduce it down until it becomes of your ideal consistency, which should take roughly 5 to 6 minutes. All that remains to be done now is to strain the vegetables to separate them from the gravy. Please don't you dare even contemplate throwing away those lovely leftovers, as they are delicious when served with rice, bread or potatoes. Finally, remember to adjust salt if desired before serving. I'm sure you'll find this gravy incredibly satisfactory and in many ways better than a standard non-vegan one. The good thing is that this recipe can be adjusted in 1,000 different ways. For example, by changing the herbs or adding some spices, you can obtain an endless amount of different exotic gravies to serve with your favorite foods. Today's recipe is for a dip which is well known all over the globe, tzatziki. Tzatziki, however, is actually non-vegan, meaning we had to veganize it. But don't worry, we didn't lose the very refreshing and sharp flavor, so it will be perfect to accompany dishes such as salads, wraps, potatoes, and any other food that goes well with an acidic and savory note. To begin with, we are going to borrow a technique used by the Indians to thicken yogurt. Well, actually steal would be a better word, as we don't really plan on giving it back. Our reason for using this technique is that the perfect yogurt to use for tzatziki is Greek yogurt, and as I'm sure you are aware, it's not readily available in a vegan form. But who cares? We can make it. Let's start by placing standard soy yogurt into a bowl and stirring it to properly uniform its thickness. Then, place a sieve over a bowl, line it with a wet muslin cloth and pour in the yogurt. Don't have a muslin cloth? Simply use a clean kitchen towel or a piece of strong kitchen paper. You will see that the water starts dripping from the yogurt immediately, which not only means that the thickening process has begun, but also that the gravity in your kitchen is still working. How reassuring. Now, cover the sieve with cling film, place the bowl into the fridge and let the yogurt thicken for 4 hours before moving on. Once the time is up, you will see that a considerable amount of liquid has dripped down from the yogurt, which is exactly what we wanted. Move on by finely grating the cucumber using a box grater or any other grater you have. You don't want to completely lose the texture of the cucumber, so be careful not to grate it too finely. Now we need to strain the grated cucumber. To do this, place it into a clean kitchen towel or a muslin cloth and squeeze it as much as you can. You basically want to end up with a completely dry bowl of grated cucumber, as you can see here. Feel free to use the juice extracted as you please, but don't throw it away, as not only is that offensive, but it's actually illegal in 95% of the world's countries. Anyway, roughly chop the cucumber, set it aside and move on to the next ingredient, which is the garlic. Finally chop a small piece of garlic and then press it onto the chopping board with the flat of the knife. This damages the structure of the garlic, hence releasing all of its flavor, and also prevents you from biting into a piece of raw garlic, which, trust me, you don't want to do. Take the strained yogurt and place it into a bowl. It is important to weigh the yogurt after the straining process and not before, otherwise you will end up with an imbalanced and wet final sauce. The second ingredient to go in is the cucumber, so add it into the bowl and stir well to incorporate it. Now add in the garlic, the vinegar, the black pepper, the salt, if you so desire, and stir well to complete the sauce. Remember to taste the sauce and adjust salt if desired. One last tip: tzatziki is best when left in the fridge for anywhere between 2 and 10 hours before consuming it, as this will allow for the flavors to properly blend. And there you have the final tzatziki. Make sure not to eat too much of it, or you will end up loving it and risk developing a tzatziki addiction. Today's recipe makes me feel so proud of myself. It's for a delicious guacamole. There are no 5 words that make me feel happier than I'm going to make guacamole, with the possible exception of I'm going to eat guacamole, but the preparation itself is a great one. Did you know that the original recipe was made out of avocado and salt alone? Now, we are not going to tell you how to mix salt and avocado, as I'm sure you already know how to do that. However, as ever, balancing flavors is all about getting the proportions right, and this recipe is a perfect example of that philosophy. To begin with, finely chop the onions to the size that you prefer. I usually go for small dices. Next, the chilies. I'm not a huge fan of heat in my food, so I like to remove all the seeds and most of the internal white membranes from the fruits, as they are the hottest parts. Once that's done, finely chop the chili. If in doing so you chop away a piece of your index fingernail, you can simply use a plaster and move on, which is exactly what I did. Now scoop out the seeds from the tomatoes by using a spoon and then dice them. The coriander, according to my personal palate, should be chopped as finely as possible. The last ingredient to prepare is the king of the dish, the avocado. Cut the avocados in half, remove the seeds, peel them, and then dice them. I can't stress enough how important it is for the avocados to be perfectly ripe, and also to buy a variety that has a powerful flavor. You can find some good options in the description box. It is now time to mix the ingredients to obtain the final guacamole. Place one of the diced avocados into a bowl and mash it thoroughly with a fork. There is absolutely no need to use 20 different ingredients in large quantities to make a wonderful guacamole. In the kitchen, most of the times, less really is more, especially when it's time to wash up. Now add the tomato dices and stir to incorporate them. Add the onions and mix them in. Add in the lime juice and stir to incorporate it. By now you should know the drill to perfection, so simply add in the rest of the chopped ingredients, the pepper and salt, and stir. Lastly, add the second avocado and incorporate it into the sauce by using a folding motion, as this will give the final sauce an interesting contrast of textures. I also wanted to let you know that the only way to prevent the oxidation of the guacamole is to not let the air come into contact with it. To do this, simply use some cling film and press it onto the surface of the sauce, as simple as that. And there you have it. If you are a fan of guacamole, have never tried it before, or are simply a curious human being, I wholeheartedly recommend that you give this recipe a go, as I'm sure you'll love it as much as I did when I first developed it. I honestly find it amazing how easily a delicious dish can be created by simply mixing a few natural ingredients. Even though they are not low-fat, nut butters are delicious, and we simply couldn't miss the chance to share with you a recipe for this extremely popular vegan preparation. We have a few tips that will help you obtain the best nut butter you have ever prepared. To begin with, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit. To prepare the butter, start by placing your favorite nuts onto an oven tray. Then, pop the tray into the preheated oven and roast the nuts for anywhere between 4 minutes for small seeds such as pumpkin seeds to 12 minutes for larger nuts such as macadamia or hazelnuts. This really depends upon the size of the nuts you are using and also upon how strong you want the roasted note to be. You don't actually need to roast the nuts to make the butter, as you can simply make it with raw nuts instead. Depending on the kind of butter you are going to make, you might want to remove the skin before blending the nuts. You could also blend the skins into the butter, but they tend to be bitter and slightly astringent. Now to the super easy part. Place the nuts into the jar of a blender and blend them at high speed until you get a butter of the consistency you prefer. If at some point the blades are not catching the ingredients, stop blending, scrape the sides of the container and blitz again. You can obtain all sorts of butters, from chunky to liquid ones, depending upon the nuts you use and the total blending time. You could use a food processor for this process, but this piece of equipment needs to run for 15 to 20 minutes to make a proper butter, and if your processor is not a good one, you risk burning it out. Water and water-based ingredients are something that should be avoided, as your nut butter will end up being a funny consistency and it will also spoil very quickly. The very last step is to pour the final butter into a container, cover it with cling film and store it in the fridge until needed. Standard storage times for nut butters can be found in the description below the video. And here is the final butter, a super creamy and opulent preparation capable of turning both salad dressings and slices of bread into lip-smacking treats. When we went vegan a few years ago, there was something that we really missed, which was mayonnaise. Because, as delicious as this sauce is, it's packed with fat and eggs, which we really don't want to eat. For this reason, we challenge ourselves by trying to create the first fat-free vegan mayo. And guess what? After a few attempts, we managed to create what we consider to be the best vegan guilt-free mayo we have ever tasted. We really want to share this recipe with you, so you can enjoy it as much as we do. First thing to do is to add the lemon and the vinegar to a container fit for a hand blender. If using a regular blender, just place the ingredients in the jug. You can now add all the other ingredients to the container. Now the ingredients are ready to be turned in the most incredible mayonnaise. Just keep watching if you don't believe us. Thoroughly blitz the ingredients until they are perfectly combined into a smooth and velvety sauce. The amazing thing about this recipe is not the fact that it takes 20 seconds to make, but the fact that they will be the most rewarding 20 seconds of your day when you realize what you get in return from these simple ingredients. Now that we can prepare a guilt-free, fat-free and vegan mayo, we can finally enjoy as much as we want of it. Here it is. Doesn't that look just perfect? Please have a go yourself and let us know how it turned out. Today's recipe is for a dish that is well known in both the vegan and non-vegan world, fresh Mexican salsa. Also known as salsa fresca or pico de gallo, this delicious and refreshing dish definitely looks more like a summery treat, but I can assure you that it fits perfectly on any table and in every season all over the world. Unless it's snowing, but you get what I mean. The first ingredient we are going to deal with is the tomatoes. To start, simply cut the tomatoes in half and scoop out the seeds with a spoon. I like to remove all the seeds simply because I don't like my salsa to be excessively watery, but if you wish to keep them in, you can certainly do so, and we promise we will not judge you in the slightest. Next, slice the tomatoes and dice them to the size of your preference. I generally go for 1 cm dices, or roughly half an inch. Now let's move on and prepare the onions, which I like to dice so that they are roughly half the size of the tomato dices. Next, finely dice the chili, and remember that if you don't want your salsa to be hot, you can simply remove the internal white membranes and seeds from the fruit. Our final ingredient to prepare, unless you want me to show you how to juice a lime, is to finely chop the coriander. Now to the hard part of the recipe, which consists of placing all the ingredients one by one into a bowl and stirring them. I like to add the diced ingredients first, mix them, then add lime juice and mix again. It is important to add the juice of the lime a little at a time, as you definitely don't want to ruin your beautiful salsa. So add 1 tablespoon, mix, taste, and if you feel that the acidity is not enough, add more. I strongly suggest you don't add salt to the salsa until you are about to serve it, or it will drive out the moisture from the tomatoes, yielding a watery salsa as opposed to the chunky one we want. And here is the final chunky and slightly fiery salsa fresca, one of the easiest and most rewarding recipes invented by mankind. After sharing the recipe for raw fresh salsa, we simply couldn't miss the opportunity to post the one for the cooked version of it. Now, I'm not sure if my version of the dish is exactly traditional, but of one thing I'm 100% sure, it is the best I've ever tasted. First thing to do is to blend the tomatoes with the fresh chilies. Some people like to blend the onions and the cilantro too, but I personally prefer to cut them by hand for a more rustic and chunky feel. Now take your favorite pan, as you definitely don't want to cook in a pan that you hate, place it over medium heat and dip in the onions and the garlic. Cook them for roughly 2 minutes or until they soften a bit and slightly catch to the pan. It is now time to add in the tomato sauce and stir to properly blend the ingredients. Now add in the cumin, the salt and the pepper and stir well to incorporate them. The quantity of salt recommended in this recipe is to obtain a standard tasting Mexican salsa, but you can always omit it if you wish to do so. At this point, you simply want to bring the sauce to a simmer, lower the heat to the minimum and cook it from anywhere between 15 to 25 minutes, depending on how watery your tomatoes are. I strongly suggest you to stir the salsa every 5 minutes to avoid burning it. Also, it is worth noting that thick tomato sauces tend to bubble quite violently, so if you don't enjoy the thrill of burning yourself whilst cooking, or the incommensurable pleasure that comes from cleaning the stove for a few hours on end, make sure to use a splatter guard. 2-3 minutes before the end of the cooking time, add in the chopped coriander and the lime juice. What you want to obtain at the end of the cooking process is this, a thick and delicious smelling salsa. Remember to cool the sauce down before serving it, unless for some specific reason you feel that eating warm salsa is a more tantalizing experience. And here you have the final salsa, ready to be served with their ultimate companion, tortilla chips. Today's recipe is one of our most successful creations, raw apricot jam. When we first tried to mix ingredients to obtain a sort of raw jam, we weren't fully convinced that it would result in something edible. However, we soon discovered that we were dead wrong. This is one of the easiest yet most exquisite recipes we have ever made. We recommend you trying it too. We are sure you love the sweet and zingy taste. To begin with, pit the dates and add them to the food processor. We are using mejul dates here as they are full of moisture, but you might decide to use your preferred dates. Our favorite kind of dates are definitely Celage. And what's yours? Let us know in the comment section below what's your favorite variety of this sugary fruit. Next on our list is grapefruit zest. That's right, you might be surprised, but citrus zest combines fantastically with dates. We are talking about the fruit of course, but we are sure that the zest will work wonders on our romantic dinner for two as well. Do not add too much zest though, or you will end up with a spread with an undesired soapy taste. And we really don't want that to happen, do we? The zest of a quarter fruit will work just fine, unless you are feeling particularly brave. The last ingredient to add is the apricot. Make sure to remove the stone and to chop roughly before adding it to the container, which will allow for a more even blending. Now all the ingredients are in and ready to be turned in the most delicious spread. Blitz the ingredients until they are slightly combined. The spread is not meant to be turned into a smooth cream, and some bigger chunks might well be desirable. We decided to stop blending when the ingredients had this exact consistency, but it's your kitchen, so feel free to blend the ingredients to your personal taste. Once finished, transfer the spread into a small bowl, cover it with cling film and let it rest in the fridge for an hour before using it. By doing so, the flavor of the ingredients will properly blend together. Now that the spread is ready, the only thing that is missing is a little taste. We tried this delicacy on its own, with additional apricots, with apples, with bananas and with mangoes, and they were all super yummy. However, our best bet is apricots and bananas, and we really recommend you to try this for an even better experience. Have you ever heard of romesco sauce? Me neither, until a couple of months ago. A dear friend of ours kindly brought us a jar of this delicacy back from Catalonia, and not only did we fall in love with this sauce, but we also decided to recreate it in an oil-free form, which never hurts. Now all our viewers can taste how good this stuff can actually be. Romesco sauce goes really well with, well, basically anything, but its best companions are grilled vegetables. To begin and finish with, place all the ingredients into a container and blend them thoroughly to obtain the final sauce. We always like to add in the dry ingredients first, so the sugar, the salt, the paprika, the black pepper and the roasted almonds, and then you can add in the garlic, the tomato concentrate, the roasted tomatoes, the roasted bell peppers, the water, the vinegar and the tofu. Traditional romesco sauce tends to have roasted peppers in it, and if you want to learn how to roast them to perfection, make sure to watch our video linked in the description below or in the card's sidebar. If for some reason you are not feeling like you want to spend time roasting ingredients, you are free to substitute the roasted tomatoes and peppers with tomato concentrate to get an easier yet still delicious romesco sauce. And here is the final sauce. Now, you know I'm a fan of sauces and dips, but this one really is extraordinary. The roasted and acidic notes perfectly combine into one of the most amazing blends of flavor. Trust me, this is something you want to try. Here is another recipe for a famous sauce known as Thai sweet chili sauce. This recipe is extraordinary as it perfectly blends together the spiciness of the chili with the sweetness of sugar, but also delivers some delicious sharp notes coming from the vinegar. However, I think I should stop talking about these, as I don't want to take away all the fun of making this recipe. So let's move on and see how to make this marvelous sauce. To begin with, let's start by chopping some perfectly ripe red chili. If you want your sauce to be hot, don't remove the internal white membranes, but if you are like me and don't really enjoy having to drink directly from a fire extinguisher, you can use only the external part of the fruit to get a lighter sauce. Now, finely chop some ginger. The last ingredient to prepare is garlic, which should obviously be chopped as finely as possible. And the hard part of the recipe is just finished. How was it? Easy, right? Now add all the ingredients into a saucepan and turn on the heat onto medium. Bring the liquid to a boil and wait. You might ask, wait for what? Well, basically now we have to wait for all the water to evaporate so that the sauce concentrates enough to become of its traditional consistency. For this reason, there is really no specific cooking time here, and I'm afraid you'll have to watch the sauce during the entire process. Generally, however, the cooking time with this quantity of ingredients is about 15 minutes, and we like to think that it's more interesting than watching paint dry due to the exciting prospect of Thai chili sauce at the end of it. You don't get that when you redecorate. But how do you know when to stop the cooking process? There are two solutions here. The first is for control freaks like me, which is to bring the sauce to exactly 106 degrees Celsius, which is about 225 degrees Fahrenheit. And the other solution is to wait for the bubbles of the sauce to change in consistency and look. It might seem strange, but investing in a $10 pan thermometer can really make the difference in the kitchen, as it would allow you to cook almost any ingredient perfectly at every single attempt. As you can see here, these are no longer the bubbles that you were seeing at the beginning of the cooking process, as by now almost all the water is evaporated and you are left with a sort of chili-flavored syrup. Here you can see the bubbles at the end of the cooking process, which basically are not really bubbles anymore, as they resemble a sort of foam. For the sake of giving you a proper explanation, here you can see a comparison of the two. On the left, the bubbles from the beginning of the cooking process, and on the right, the bubbles telling you to turn off the heat quickly. Does this make sense? I hope so, as unfortunately there is no other way for you to know when is the time to end the cooking process. However, trust me on this, it's pretty straightforward. Also remember that the sauce hardens when it cools down, so don't be tempted by cooking it more to thicken it, or you will end up with sweet chili caramel sauce. And although we really want to make a recipe for caramel sauce, we are not quite sure today is the day. And here you have the final Thai sweet chili sauce. Be honest with us, how does it look? Aren't you looking forward to dip something into it? Grilled vegetables are a great option, but your index finger would be equally effective, and I say that from years of experience. Here is our take on a popular Japanese recipe, teriyaki sauce. This sauce can be prepared in 1,000 different ways, but the one we are going to propose today gives incredible results in very little time, and it yields a final glaze to be enjoyed with your favorite foods. Teriyaki sauce is a killer combination with grilled vegetables, tofu, and if you like sweet and savory preparations, it is the perfect dipping sauce for potatoes. This is once again an easy recipe perfect for those who enjoy cooking when it only requires stirring ingredients together. To begin with, place the sugar, the water, the soy sauce, the garlic, and the ginger into a small saucepan. Now turn on the heat to medium and start stirring. The goal is to bring the liquid to boiling temperature before adding the rest of the ingredients. As you can probably imagine, the recipe is almost finished, which makes this video one of the dumbest tutorials we have ever done. However, don't be fooled by its simplicity. This glaze is incredibly delicious and it transforms almost any food into something appetizing, great tasting, and delicious looking. As soon as the liquid starts to simmer, lower the heat to the minimum. On the side, mix the starch with a touch of water, add the mixture to the boiling ingredients and start stirring immediately to obtain a properly thickened and lump-free sauce. Within seconds, you'll have obtained teriyaki sauce, which is commonly used in some of the world's best restaurants to add some delicious sweet and savory notes to various different dishes. And here you have the final sauce ready to be brushed over any food that you want to transform into a shiny and delectable masterpiece. Not that they weren't already, of course. We feel that sauces, dips and glazes are very useful in the kitchen, as if you manage to make a few of them together, you end up with an amazing array of tastes, which are able to turn every dinner into a taste bud tantalizing treat. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Corner. When it comes to our preferred Italian foods, the following is definitely one of the recipes that comes to mind, which is the one to prepare gnocchi from scratch. Unfortunately, the gnocchi you find in supermarkets almost invariably contain eggs, which is odd, as they are not only useless for this particular preparation, but also not a component of the traditional recipe. So if you want to make gnocchi the proper way, then keep watching. This pasta substitute is prepared by using only two simple ingredients. The first thing to do to prepare the gnocchi is to bring a pot of water to the boil, tip in the potatoes and cook them for 40 minutes. To test if the potatoes are cooked, pierce them with a toothpick. You know they are ready if the pick easily passes through the center of the potatoes. Boiling the potatoes whole will prevent them from falling apart whilst cooking. So please don't be tempted by peeling and cutting the potatoes to speed up the process, as it won't work and you will end up with potato soup, a bad potato soup. And I'm quite sure that nobody likes a bad potato soup, right? The perfect potato varieties for gnocchi are Mary's Piper, King Edward and Russet. Once the potatoes are cooked, drain them and peel them whilst they are still hot. Unfortunately, to achieve better gnocchi, you must work with hot potatoes, so don't wait too long before peeling them after the cooking process. Once peeled, dice the potatoes and press them through a potato ricer over a working surface. If you are wondering why this piece of equipment is called potato ricer, we have no idea. Now sift all the flour onto the mashed potatoes. Or should I say riced potatoes? Now take a dough scraper or a knife and start cutting through the flour to mix the ingredients. This process will make the task of kneading a little easier. You could of course use gluten-free flour for this recipe, but I wouldn't suggest doing it on your first attempt, as this preparation might seem easy, but it still takes some practice to get it spot on. Do you want to know a funny thing about this recipe? The recommended amount of salt for this amount of ingredients is 15 grams, which is about half an ounce in the US. I mean, 15 grams of salt. Seriously, that's crazy, right? I can assure you that having no salt at all makes them taste even better. Once finished, thoroughly mix the ingredients by hand until a rough dough is obtained. At the end of this process, the dough should be firm to the eye, but soft to the touch. I know that this sounds a little romantic, but I simply couldn't find a better way to describe the consistency of the dough. Sorry. The gnocchi dough should always be a little sticky. If it's too sticky, a little more flour can be added. Roll the dough into a cylindrical shape and cover it with a kitchen towel. Leave the mixture to rest for 10 minutes before moving on. Once the time has elapsed, remove the towel from the dough and dust some flour onto the working surface. Cut a part of the dough with a knife or a pastry scraper and roll it into a sausage shape, a vegan sausage of course. Now cut the Italian vegan potato sausage into pieces of the desired dimension. Each of these pieces will become a gnocco, which is the Italian singular for gnocchi. At this point, there are two ways to give the gnocchi their traditional shape: with a riga gnocchi, also known as gnocchi board, or with a fork. To make the gnocchi with the board, gently press and roll the piece of dough onto the wood to achieve the classic shape. The hands you are seeing working with the gnocchi dough are the ones of the most experienced master baker I've ever had the pleasure to work with, the wonderful Miriam. When she's preparing breads, pizzas and other baked goodies, the most amazing aroma spreads all over the house, making it impossible to resist the urge to try some while she's not looking. To proceed with the other method, dust a fork with some flour and gently press and roll each gnocco against the fork's prongs. To cook the gnocchi, simply plunge them into boiling water and keep them in until they rise to the surface. Nothing too fancy, as you can see. There you have it, your first batch of homemade, perfectly shaped, low-cost and super healthy gnocchi ready to be cooked and enjoyed, without eggs. Don't be afraid of this preparation at all, as it is really straightforward. I remember making this the first time when I was 9 years old, and despite the young age, they turned out to be quite good. When it comes to Italian food, we've got you covered as we are Italians. In fact, today's recipe is one of the most famous preparations in the whole world, tomato sauce. We are sure you already know how to prepare tomato sauce. However, what you probably don't know is how to prepare a tomato sauce without oil, which still tastes fantastic enough to suit an Italian palate. To begin with, slice the garlic as you desire. You have a few options here. You can finely mince the garlic, slice it, or leave it in bigger chunks so that they can be removed when the sauce is finished. Many Italians leave the clove untouched to easily remove it at the end of the cooking process. Next, place a saucepan over a medium heat and pour in the oil. You are probably thinking that adding oil to an oil-free dish is slightly counterproductive, and you're right, but we promise that every drop will be removed during the following steps. Dip in the garlic and gently fry it until it acquires a light brown color. This will add a toasted garlic note to the final dish, which is what turns a regular tomato sauce into a special one. As soon as the garlic is of the right color, turn off the heat to stop the cooking process and to eliminate any risk of burning the garlic. Tilt the pan and let all the oil collect on one side. Once all the oil is on one side of the pan, absorb it with a piece of kitchen paper, and you would have fried garlic without oil. How easy was that? Now turn the heat back on medium, dip in the tomatoes, break them into smaller pieces and stir. We are using tinned tomatoes here, but feel free to use fresh tomatoes instead. It is worth noting, however, that very few Italians use fresh tomatoes. This is as if we waited for fresh tomatoes to become available, we would only be able to make our favorite dishes during the summer. That will make the rest of the year a very sad time for us, so we really are grateful for tinned tomatoes. It's also near impossible to get fresh tomatoes that are of the same ripeness as tinned ones. Remember that all tomatoes are always a better choice than chopped ones, so always buy whole ones when you have the option. Bring the sauce to a simmer, lower the heat to the minimum and cover the pan with a lid. Make sure to leave the pot partially uncovered to let the steam escape. This will concentrate the sauce and the flavor over time. Cook the sauce for 5 minutes over the lowest heat. Once the time is elapsed, turn off the heat, remove the lid and stir the sauce. Turn the heat on again, bring the sauce back to a simmer, place the lid back on and cook for additional 5 minutes over the lowest heat. You might be wondering why we are turning the burner on and off before stirring. Obviously we are just testing that it works. Well, not really, it's actually down to the fact that the sauce is so thick that whilst boiling it literally projects tomato sauce all over the kitchen, and we would rather avoid that, wouldn't we? Once the time is up, repeat the whole process one last time and turn off the heat to complete the sauce. 15 minutes of total cooking time is generally enough for small quantities of sauce, but if you are planning of making more, or if your tin tomatoes are more watery, the sauce might require a little longer cooking and possibly a little higher heat under the pan. Just stick to our rules and your sauce will end up spot on. There is one last very important step to turn the sauce into something really Italian, which is to add a few torn basil leaves. 3 of them should do for this quantity of sauce. Once the last ingredient has been added, stir one last time to complete the sauce. The basil will cook with the residual heat of the tomatoes, so there is no need for the burner to be on here. And there you have it. This is what we consider to be a perfectly prepared traditional Italian sauce, ready to be used in any dish that requires it. We were able to serve this sauce to several Italians, and none of them was able to understand how a sauce could be that good without using any oil. As you probably already know, we recently posted the recipe about how to make gnocchi from scratch. What you don't know is one of the best ways to serve them, with tomato sauce. This recipe is extremely simple, yet it yields results fit for a king. Well, at least for a low-fat vegan king. If you have your gnocchi ready, it will take you only a couple of minutes to complete this dish, and we are sure you'll love it. Now be prepared, because this one is really simple. Who said that good food has to be complicated? To cook the gnocchi, simply plunge them into boiling water and keep them in until they rise to the surface. However, we suggest you to do the sauce first and then cook the gnocchi, just to avoid annoying timing mistakes. Place your favorite pan on a medium heat and pour in the tomato sauce. You can use our recipe for tomato sauce if you want, and you know where to find the link, right? Once the sauce starts boiling, add some freshly grated pepper, some chili powder, and stir to incorporate the spices. Add a few torn basil leaves and stir again to complete the sauce. Now you really want to get the consistency of the sauce right before moving on, as this is what will make the final dish perfect. The sauce should be thick enough to properly coat the gnocchi, and only experience will tell you when it is the right time to stir in the gnocchi. However, you can get a pretty good idea by simply looking at how we are doing it. Now cook the gnocchi, drain them and tip them into the pan with the sauce. Start mixing immediately with a spatula to completely coat the gnocchi with the condiment. The sauce will soon thicken even more due to the starches released by the gnocchi, and this is perfectly normal. If you feel that the sauce is a little too thick for your personal taste, add a touch of water to thin it down just a bit. The gnocchi are of course already cooked, and you don't have to cook them any further during this stage, so make sure to be fast and efficient. And hey, if you don't have the gnocchi, no worries. Simply throw in a few boiled potatoes or some pasta instead, and you will still end up with something extraordinary. And here you have the final dish ready to be devoured. To be honest with you, I have no fancy words to describe this dish, apart from remarkably good. You have arrived on the second recipe, dedicated to our friend Frilly the Banana Girl. She once told us that lasagna is one of her favorite dishes, and who better than a couple of Italian chefs to attempt to create a good version of this popular and traditional recipe? Well, we are definitely up for the task, so let's go ahead and prepare some stunning lasagna. To begin with, let's chop a few veggies we need. So take the carrots, the onions and the celery and dice them as finely as you desire. We like to chop them finely, but that's not really necessary, so feel free to go for the size that you prefer. For the bechamel sauce, place a saucepan over a medium heat and tip in the dry ingredients followed by the milk. Whisk the ingredients properly to disperse the starch. Now, swap the whisk for a spatula and start stirring the ingredients. As soon as the milk is warm, you can add in the vegan butter and keep stirring to dissolve it. The butter adds some richness to the sauce, but it is not mandatory to use it. Stir constantly until the sauce thickens and reaches boiling point, and then turn off the heat. Let the sauce cool down completely before using it. For the tomato sauce, take a pan, place it over a medium heat, and tip in the onions, the carrots, the celery, and the passata. Clean the bottle of passata with the water from the recipe and add the tomato water to the pan. How Italian of me. Add in the garlic granules, the miso paste, and the baking soda. Now bring the sauce to the boil, cover the pan with the lid, turn the heat down to the minimum, and cook the sauce for 15 minutes. If your passata is already quite thick, you might want to adjust the cooking time to prevent it from becoming excessively thick. In the meantime, you can rehydrate the TVP by placing it into a bowl, covering it with boiling water, and letting it stand for 1 minute. Once the time has elapsed, drain it and squeeze out the excess water. If you don't want to use TVP, also known as textured vegetable protein, you will find some substitutes in the description below. Once the 15 minutes have elapsed, remove the lid from the pan, add in the TVP, the chopped rosemary, and a dash of black pepper if desired. By now you should know the drill to perfection, so stir the ingredients together, bring the liquid back to the boil, cover the pan with the lid, and let the sauce simmer for another 15 minutes over the lowest heat, or until reasonably thick. It's not really my fault if cooking techniques are repetitive, what I do care about are the results, so if covering and stirring is all we need to do to get great food in return, perfect. Once the time has elapsed, turn off the heat and let the sauce cool down completely before using it. Since the sauce is a key component of the final lasagna, make sure to taste it and adjust the salt if necessary. Believe it or not, we are ready to layer the final lasagna, which is likely to be the easiest of the tasks of this recipe. Actually no, the easiest thing to do is to preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit, which you can do right now. For the sake of being thorough, here we are using a 23 cm 9-inch square oven dish. To build the final lasagna, dip some of the ragu into the dish, followed by some of the bechamel, and evenly spread the ingredients. By now it should be clear to you how many things you could do with this sauce apart from lasagna, so please don't be afraid of using this delicious looking ragu to make the ultimate pasta or rice dish. Now place a layer of pasta on top of the filling, add more ragu and bechamel on top of it, and also a layer of vegan cheese if desired. Keep alternating a layer of pasta to a layer of filling until you run out of ingredients, which in our case happened after the 4th layer of pasta. To get an even more appealing lasagna, add a generous layer of bechamel sauce on top of the last layer and also a good quantity of meltable vegan cheese. The lasagna is now ready to be cooked, so place it into the preheated oven and bake it for 30 minutes or until it looks like this. I feel that adding words here would be a total waste of your time, and if you like lasagna, I'm sure that you are perfectly able to tell how good this version is. To get a lasagna that perfectly keeps its shape, let it cool down for 10 to 15 minutes before slicing it and serving it. I don't actually remember how standard lasagna used to taste like, however, what I do vividly remember is how much I used to love them, and I can honestly say that I've never loved a lasagna dish as much as this one. It's decadent, beautiful, and also delicious. If you want my humble opinion, no cooking channel should be up and running without having a good recipe for melanzane alla parmigiana, also known as eggplant parmesan, as this dish is absolutely divine. Aubergines have the tendency to be quite bland, but let me tell you that once you have prepared them the right way, they turn into one of the most amazing savory ingredients. To begin with, let's slice the aubergine. In this case, you want to obtain slices that are quite thin, but at the same time there is no need to be too stressed about it, because thicker slices will work just as well. If you find it difficult to slice the aubergine in its whole form, cut it in half lengthwise, and you'll find the task of slicing it much easier. Next, place a griddle pan over a high heat and warm it up until it's screaming hot, and then start grilling the eggplant. I know that it's not very vegan of me to make a pan scream, but that's what it takes to get to the end of the recipe. Every slice generally takes about 30 seconds to cook on the first side, and 15 seconds on the second side. But this really depends on the pan you have, its temperature, and how loud it screams. Ideally, you want to achieve some light grill marks on the slices, which can range from brown or black, according to personal taste. Once the grilling stage is complete, we are ready to build the Parmigiana. But before doing that, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, take an oven dish and start with the layering. For this quantity of ingredients, we are using a dish that is 23 by 13 centimeters or 9 by 5 inches. The order of the layers should be tomato sauce first, and then eggplant, sauce, salt, vegan cheese, fresh basil, eggplant again, and so on. The last layer should obviously be a tomato sauce one, with some cheese sprinkled on it, which will allow you to obtain the best good-looking parmesan possible. The dish doesn't need to be greased, but you can definitely do so if it makes you any happier. The sauce we are using here is a basic tomato sauce made with passata, but you can either use your favorite sauce or follow one of the recipes linked down below and in the cards. During this stage, you don't really have to be fast, nor furious, so relax and enjoy the peacefulness of the layering. The vegan cheese can be substituted with our mozzarella cheese if you so desire. Once the layering is complete, the Parmigiana is ready to go in the preheated oven, where it will need to cook for 35 minutes. To allow for even cooking, make sure to rotate the dish halfway through the cooking time. Once the time has elapsed, the parmesan is ready to be enjoyed. However, to make this delicacy a whole lot easier to slice and serve, make sure to let it cool down for at least 10 minutes before serving it. Now that is what I call an entirely new kind of yummy. It's time for you to go shopping for aubergines and get preparing. And if you end up trying this recipe, make sure to let us know if you enjoyed it. There are many known ways to prepare green beans, but being Italians, the one we like the most is with tomato sauce. This recipe is once again one of those where you literally have to throw a few ingredients into the pan, turn on the heat, wait a little while, and then, out of nowhere, something spectacular will appear. These really are the recipes I always dreamed of, and now that I know a few of them, I'm very happy to share them with you. To begin with, remove the top and the tail from the beans, as these parts generally tend to be a little more fibrous than the rest of the bean. Then cut the beans into pieces. You could also leave them whole, but they are much easier to eat if you cut them, and they will also look a lot better once the dish is complete. Now finally dice the garlic. Place your favorite pan over a high heat and add in the liquid ingredients first. Now add the beans, the tomato sauce, the onions and the garlic into the pan. Stir the ingredients well to combine and bring the liquid to a boil. If you want to know how to make our tomato sauce, you can find the link in the description below the video. Once the sauce starts boiling, lower the heat to the minimum, cover the pan with a lid and cook the ingredients for 10 minutes. The liquid should simmer for the duration of the cooking time. Once the time has elapsed, remove the lid and give the ingredients a good stir. Now put the lid back on and cook the beans for another 10 to 15 minutes, or until they are properly cooked. Standard green beans take up to 25 minutes to cook, but there are some super tough varieties out there, and if you stumble upon one of those, you might want to add some more water and cook them for a bit longer. Once the time has elapsed, the beans should be perfectly cooked, but the sauce might still be a little too thin. Should that be the case, simply increase the heat and reduce the sauce for a few minutes until it thickens. Remember to taste this amazing dish before serving it, because it might need a pinch of salt to better match your specific taste buds. And here you have the final beans, ready to be devoured. I've always loved healthy, shiny and delicious looking foods, and this preparation is the perfect example. I won't judge you, of course, if you decide to use this recipe as a condiment for pasta or rice. However, to get the most out of this dish, I'd recommend to serve it as a side, as these beans are really delectable when enjoyed on their own. Caponata is a delicious and rather popular Sicilian vegetable dish, usually prepared with fried aubergines. However, apart from the fact that we are not going to fry anything, the thing that makes this dish really impressive is the combination of sweet and sour ingredients, which is something quite extraordinary. To begin with, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 360 degrees Fahrenheit and toast the pine nuts for 5 minutes. This will add a delicious roasted note to the caponata later on. Next, chop all the vegetables into chunks of roughly the same size. Be brave during this step and try not to care too much about making the pieces too small or too similar to each other. After all, this is a rustic delicacy and we want you to keep it that way. Now, place a pan over a medium heat. Tip the oil, the onions and the celery in and cook them until the onions are slightly translucent and smell really good, about 5 minutes. The oil can be omitted and substituted with some water, but we feel that the small quantity added makes this dish way more authentic, especially considering the fried nature of the original preparation. Now add in the aubergines, the tomatoes, the capers, the olives, the vinegar, the sugar, and stir to combine the ingredients. Cook the ingredients for a couple of minutes or until slightly softened. Now, add in the oregano, the water, and stir to combine. As soon as the water starts boiling, you can lower the heat to the minimum, cover the pan with the lid, and cook the caponata for 20 minutes. Halfway through the cooking time, give the ingredients a good stir to ensure that they are not burning on the bottom of the pan. Once the time has elapsed, the caponata is ready to be served, but first, make sure to stir in the toasted pine nuts and to taste the dish and adjust the salt if necessary. And here is the final caponata, a very Mediterranean delicacy usually appreciated by eaters of all sorts, fussy or else. This is one of those dishes really open to interpretation, and there is no exact rule to make it. However, we wanted to share with you the way we like to prepare it. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Corner. This video is about a focaccia that is extremely popular in Italy, focaccia barese. This delicacy is generally drowned in olive oil, to the extent that if you were to squeeze it, you could easily dress a salad for 5 people with the oil that drips from it. Well, just for you guys, we completely removed the oil from the equation and found a way to obtain this traditional Italian product in only 3 hours. And trust me, if you have never tried this focaccia before, you don't know how good a piece of bread can actually be. To begin with, sift all the flour into a bowl. Then add in the mashed potatoes. You can use a potato ricer to mash the potatoes or simply crush them with a fork. Add in the salt and start mixing the ingredients into the flour. Next, add in all the water and mix the ingredients by hand until you obtain a rough dough. Moving on, transfer the dough onto a working surface and knead it by hand for 5 minutes straight. You are probably wondering why on earth you should waste your time kneading when you can make a no-knead focaccia. That is pretty simple to answer, because this focaccia takes 3 hours to make, and not 12-18 hours as opposed to the no-knead counterpart. Not everybody likes to wait 1 day to get hold of an outstanding piece of bread. Once finished, place the dough back into the bowl, dust it with some flour, cover it with cling film, and place it in a warm place to rise for 90 minutes. At any time, you can also make the topping for the focaccia, starting by cutting the tomatoes. I'm using medium to small tomatoes at this time, so I'm cutting them into 4 pieces. Although if you have different sized tomatoes, just adjust how you cut them accordingly. To finish the topping, mix in the salt, the oregano, and the pepper, and then leave the tomatoes to marinate until they are kneaded. When the rising time has elapsed, dust the kneading surface with some flour, remove the dough from the bowl with a spatula, and transfer it onto the surface. Gently stretch the dough by hand to obtain a flat shape, and then fold the dough into thirds like a letter, so left side end folded first, then the right end over that. Now, fold the dough in thirds again, but this time top to bottom instead of side to side. You can also roll the dough, as Miriam is showing you here. Next, form a sort of smooth ball by grabbing the edges and gently tucking them under the bowl, turning as you smooth and round the dough. This is actually easier to show than to explain. Place the dough back into the bowl, dust it again with some flour and cover it with cling film. Let the dough rise for an additional 30 minutes. Once the time has elapsed, transfer the dough into a baking tray lined with greaseproof paper dusted with some flour and gently stretch it into a flat shape. For the sake of being thorough, here we are using a 35 by 25 centimeters oven tray, or 14 by 10 inches if you prefer. Now poke the dough all over with your fingertips to create the traditional focaccia dimples. Take the marinated tomatoes and press them into the focaccia without being too precise, as you want to achieve a rustic final look. You can also preheat the oven to 200 degrees Celsius or 390 degrees Fahrenheit. Also make sure to drizzle the juices released by the tomatoes randomly over the dough to add extra flavor. Cover the tray with a kitchen towel and leave the dough to rise for the last 30 minutes. Once the time has elapsed, remove the towel and bake the focaccia for 20 minutes. And there you have it. The addition of potatoes to the dough not only makes the final focaccia extremely soft to the bite, but it also helps the yeast to do its magic so that you can have the final product in a nice, short amount of time. Hi there! Today we will be looking at another recipe we were requested to make a video for, Indian roti. Flatbreads in general are very popular in Indian culture, as they are easy to make, fast to cook, and don't contain any yeast. The method we are going to show you today is not necessarily traditional, but is the one that will give you the best results in the shortest amount of time. This recipe requires very few ingredients. To begin with, sift the flour into a bowl large enough to accommodate all the ingredients. If you want your roti to be flavored, feel free to add your favorite spices to the flour before moving on. Now pour in the water and slightly combine the ingredients with a fork to achieve a rough dough. Once the ingredients are roughly mixed, tip the content of the bowl onto a working surface and start kneading by hand until a homogeneous and smooth dough is obtained. To achieve better results, make sure to knead for at least 5 to 8 minutes to properly blend the ingredients. Once finished, wrap the dough into some cling film and let it rest for 30 minutes before moving on. Once the time has elapsed, remove the dough from the film and roll it as thin as possible. Dough of any kind should always rest for some time before you work them into their final shape. This process allows the gluten to relax and creates a strong structure which makes the final dough easier to work with and more elastic. Now, the method we are about to show you is not the traditional way of making roti, and in fact, it isn't the proper way to make any flat bread at all. So why are we making it this way? Because it's the fastest, and if you are not a master baker but still want to obtain great results, we strongly recommend you to use this method. If you are Indian and you are thinking yourself, what the hell are these guys doing? Then hold on to that thought, as we are doing the best we can do to allow non-Indian people to make this bread basically effortlessly. Once the dough is reasonably flat, cut it into your preferred shape using a pastry cutter or any other sharp object you like to work with. Please do not waste the excess dough. It can be rekneaded and cut into more shapes or cooked as it is to obtain some unusually shaped roti, which are sure to taste as equally as delicious as the others. To cook the bread, start by preheating a non-stick pan over high heat. There is no need to grease it, of course, because as the name describes, it is already non-stick. Once the pan is hot, tip in some of the previously prepared bread and watch the magic happen. The bread will soon start to cook and to puff up. Now, you really want your roti to puff whilst it is cooking, as that means that some steam is developing inside the dough. The internal steam is what cooks this delicious bread from the inside. This is also why a good roti has a layered internal structure, because due to the fact that it puffs, the dough separates into beautiful and tender layers. This bread should cook for roughly 2 minutes on each side, or until it reaches a light brown color on both sides. Now, there is something worth noting about this bread. Roti doesn't contain yeast, so it has a chewy texture, and it is best when prepared and consumed immediately afterwards. For the same reason, it doesn't respond very well if left to sit for a few hours on the kitchen counter, So if you made your bread yesterday and you're fully convinced that today is still going to have a nice consistency, well, unfortunately you are going to be disappointed. But it will allow you to make it all over again, and that's half the fun, right? Anyway, as you can see, this bread can be of any shape or size. You can cut them small and use them as a base for some tartlets, or alternatively, you could make them larger and serve them with your favorite curry, your choice. And this is the final bread ready to be served, and personally, I find it quite delicious. As you could see, this bread really is a quick preparation, which makes it a perfect alternative when you have one of those days where you want to cook, but don't want to waste an entire day in the kitchen. We say waste, but personally we don't think any time in the kitchen is wasted. Today's video is for a food we all know pretty well, pancakes. Now, we all have a good recipe for pancakes, and due to the fact that they are really quite simple to make, we will focus this tutorial on how to get perfect pancakes at every single attempt, instead of proposing a specific recipe to you. We really hope you walk away from this tutorial with more knowledge about this super famous sweet treat. Are you ready to be turned into a professional pancake machine? A recipe for gluten-free pancakes will follow very soon, which will be a normal recipe and not a cooking lesson such as this one. There are only a few things to consider when making great pancakes, consistency and temperature of the batter being one, proper cooking, thickness of the actual pancake and the color of them being the others. Why do some pancakes end up thinner or thicker than others? Why do some have a uniform brown color, whilst others never color properly? What's the best cooking time? When is the right time to flip a pancake? If you have ever had any of these questions rushing through your brain, then this might just be the perfect video for you. First, let's talk about the batter. Pancakes can be of any size, any thickness and any shape. Although, when was the last time you enjoyed a triangle pancake? Pancakes are best eaten round, in our opinions at least. But if you want to spend the time trying to achieve a triangle pancake, we won't judge you much. Making thicker or thinner pancakes is something we can easily control during the preparation and should never be left down to luck. The best way to control the thickness of the batter is obviously by increasing or decreasing the quantity of flour or by adding or removing milk. Only experience will tell you how the batter should be in order to achieve the pancakes you desire, but if you experiment a bit, you will become a master in no time. What is the best thickness for the batter? No matter what you're trying to cook, there will always be a correlation between size and cooking speed. For example, thin pancakes will obviously cook faster than thicker ones. How much faster, you might wonder? Every time you double the thickness of a food, you are not doubling the cooking time, but